Hello and welcome to another edition of Community Forum. My name is Joseph Feaster. I am the host of the program, and I have a guest who really needs no introduction. Holds a special place in our city, in our state, in our nation, because of the work that he has done locally as well as nationally. And that person is in the form of Senator Brian Joyce, who is our senator, has been representing us well, not only represents the town of Stoughton, but in terms of Milton, Canton, and Easton, I believe, if I have all of them correct. Is that correct, Senator? Or is there one more?
There are a number more. Braintree and Randolph and Avon, I think you didn't mention. East Bridgewater, West Bridgewater.
Well, you see how it is. Yeah. You get very parochial
so
after a while.
So it's 10 towns, starting with Braintree, going down East Bridgewater on Route 24, basically.
Well, I'm being parochial. I want us to claim you here in Stoughton.
Sure.
So we don't, I'll leave those other cities and towns to their own devices. A new legislative year, a new governor, a lot's been going on. I want to see if we can talk about your new legislative positions, some of the initiatives that you plan to pursue this year, many of which I know you accomplished in the last fiscal year. How's the new governor doing? Want to talk about the snow, want to talk about the MBTA. I want to cover it all in about 28 minutes, but in terms of I know we can do it, so why don't you start where you would like to. Let's talk about your legislative agenda and your new legislative positions.
Sure. Well, we do have a new governor. We have a new Senate president. We have the returning speaker. We have reconstituted the Senate, and I was elected the assistant majority leader by my colleagues in the Senate. And
congratulations. That's a key position.
Some additional responsibilities, which is terrific. I'd say the new governor is off to a pretty good start. It's still the honeymoon period, but I think he's off to a good start, and he's sounding the right note, and that is a bipartisan, we're all in this together working toward the common good note. And I think that's frankly the way the Senate works. We have been engaging in this so-called Commonwealth conversations where a group of senators, probably as many as 15 to 20 of us, travel around the state, and we've been having these public hearings. We had about 250 people last night in Braintree. We've gone to the South Shore, we've gone to the North Shore, we've gone to the western part of the state, we've gone to the central part of the state, and it's Republicans and Democrats. We work together very well. It is not like Washington at all. In the State House, we have a very collegial, collaborative relationship with our Republican colleagues, and I think that's to the common good. So far, Governor Baker has sounded that same note, and I think that is also to the common good. Yes, you mentioned the snow. We've had a historic amount of snow. And yes, we have had a colossal failure at the MBTA and through our public transportation system. And it's a bit of a wake-up call. I think that we had an announcement this week that Frank DePaula has been appointed as the acting general manager of the MBTA. He's a constituent. He comes from East Bridgewater. East Bridgewater. He is a good leader, the right person for the job. We have two things with the MBTA. One, I think a failure of leadership, and I think poor operations. The operations need to be improved dramatically. When the snow came, they sent MBTA trains out to push the snow, and that caused the trains to break down. So what did they do? They sent out more trains to push the snow, and the same thing happened. It exacerbated the problem. So some of it's operational. People here in Stoughton had troubles with the commuter rail.
We still have it.
It's been somewhat of a disaster. Now, and we've also seen just how important the MBTA and the commuter rail is to our regional economy, because the roads, the main roads, the highways, were actually pretty good. They were plowed pretty well, but they just couldn't handle the additional capacity because of the failure of the public transportation. So the first thing is we need better operations. I think Frank DiPaola is a good leader, and I think that it's been a wake-up call, and they will implement changes. Second is an investment in our transportation. Many of us have been calling for this for a number of years. We did make some investments in the last 5 years. We've just bought all new train cars for the Green Line and about 70 new cars for the Red Line. They'll be coming on in the next 3 years. There is a time delay here. But it shows to me, Joseph, that we simply cannot go forward with the South Coast Rail and with further expansion until we address our existing public transit system, until we improve our existing. They're drowning in a mountain of debt. As I said, the operations need to be improved, and then we, the public, once we know the money is well spent, need to make further investment.
I'm glad you said that, because as I sat there and watched this, I served in transportation agencies sometime in my career past, and is well known in terms of how the debt, the MBTA was encumbered with quite a bit of debt as a result of both from the Big Dig and other issues, the delayed maintenance, all of these things that were coming out. And I guess as I sat there as a citizen watching what was being placed upon Beverly Scott, I found it to be a little bit unfair because of the history of it. But as you say, there's operational issues as well. So I'm hoping that Frank DiPaola, who has been in transportation and in highway for a long time, will be able to address that. We certainly need it. I know I've missed the commuter rail for this past month. But what would your thoughts be on this whole issue of reimbursement?
Well, actually, I co-sponsored legislation today with Representative Kafka, who represents Stoughton, along with Representative Bill Galvin, who represents Stoughton, to require the MBTA to give reimbursement.
Okay.
Any business that fails to deliver a product can't expect consumers to pay for that product. So I think the MBTA needs to think of its commuters as its customers, as its clients, and so I think that it's somewhat symbolic, but I think certainly the right thing to do. Now, another thing this has done, if we can find a kind of a silver lining to this cloud, and for a lot of people, yourself included, just this commuting has been a nightmare recently. But the silver lining is, I think it is a wake-up call to all of us, to the general public, that we need to invest in our infrastructure. There's some discussion of moving the Olympics, or we're competing for the Olympics here in Boston in 2024. 6 years later, we're going to have the 400th anniversary of the city of Boston. It gives us, I think, a couple of target dates to have this public infrastructure, including certainly public transportation, dramatically improved. It gives us, I think, a common goal, a deadline to make significant improvements for the next 50 years.
I want to just chat with you about, since you mentioned the Olympics, because there have been mixed feelings with regards to it, communities and individuals trying to discern whether there will be a direct impact, a direct positive impact, a direct benefit. Will we be saddled with debt like many of the cities around the country and around the world that have hosted the Olympics? What are your initial thoughts? Have you been briefed on some of this, Senator? And I want to look at it citywide, from the standpoint of Boston, statewide, and then of course, let's be a little parochial, look at your 10 cities and towns. What's the benefit for us?
I'm very enthusiastic on competing for the Olympics, and with caveats, with mechanisms in place to ensure that we don't take on a mountain of debt or incur undue expense. We saw with totalitarian regimes in Russia and China, they spent crazy money. But we also see now the current trend in the Olympic Committee is to have far less of an investment by the host country to try to use some of your existing infrastructure, but indeed it does give us an opportunity to make investments. I'm not talking about building white elephants that are going to be, relics that don't serve a future use, but we have a lot of sports, stadia in Greater Boston already. We have universities. We have a lot of different venues, and I look to, say, Barcelona, which was a, not as well known, certainly not a world-class city, and collectively that community got together to compete and host the 1992 Olympics. And it really put that city on the map, and it resulted in significant upgrades to their infrastructure. It's a beautiful kind of tourist destination now, and I'd say that all these years later, they're still reaping the benefits. It's 23 years later, and I think that a similar thing could happen in Boston. And we saw in New York City, where they competed for the Olympics a few years ago, they were unsuccessful, but the investments that they made in order to be competitive is reaping dividends for that city. And their leaders suggest that even by losing, they won. So I think that if we put constraints and ensure that that this is largely privately financed, but with some community effort and investment that's going to serve not just the Olympics, but our residents and our businesses, really addressing our dilapidated infrastructure, I think it could be a very good thing, bring a lot of excitement, enthusiasm, and indeed money to our region.
Well, one of the things I would say, notwithstanding where you may feel or pro or con on the issue, there's still a sense of pride when you start talking about the competition for the Olympics that Boston had to compete in, because we came out as the only city in the United States. I think it's United States. Is Italy? Is Rome one of them that's still in?
I think so. I think there's
about I don't know. There's two of them, but what I'm saying, as far as United States, we're the only one of the U.S. cities that made the cut and could place the bid. So I think from that standpoint there, certainly there's a reason to feel maybe what we call Boston strong in order to have that. So we'll see how that, I know there's planned conversations about this that are going on around the state, so we'll probably hear more about that as time goes on. And I know John Fish is really the instrumental in terms of the chair, and our former transportation secretary is the executive director. So we have a lot to see from going forward from there. I know House 1, I believe House 1 should have come to you. I don't know if the snow has prevented it. It's usually in January that House 1 comes to from the governor to the House for that. Has that occurred already? Has he submitted his budget?
So the governor is now this year suggesting his budget will be offered, I think not for another 2 weeks.
Okay.
So maybe even as late as, I'm not sure when this is going to run, but maybe as late as March 5th. So it's going to be a little bit later this year. We certainly have financial challenges. There was, at the end of last year, or the current year we're in, our fiscal year runs until June 30th, about a $750 million shortfall that we had to make up. Again, we're not like Washington. We don't engage in deficit spending. Our budget has to be balanced every year, just as the town's budgets have to be balanced every year, and that's a good thing. So we had $750 million to make up. We have, but now it shows for next year, we start with a $1.5 billion structural deficit. So even though revenues are on the uptick, spending has increased more, largely healthcare. Right now, we have almost 25% of Massachusetts residents, over 20%, almost 25%, are receiving their health care through the government, through Mass Health. And that is more than expected, and it's costing more than expected. That's probably the biggest portion of the budget, but there are others. So in addition to serving as the Assistant Majority Leader, I've been asked to head up a special commission, and the governor has suggested that we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. So I've been tasked with looking at how we're spending public dollars. I think there's always a lot of focus on the revenue side and not enough on the spending side. How is the money spent and how might we spend it smarter? For example, there's a lot of discussion about criminal justice reform. As a society, not as bad here in Massachusetts, but still a problem, we are of the mindset, lock them up and throw away the key. And we are incarcerating so many of our people, more than any other nation on earth. It's just extraordinary, and it continues to grow, including here in Massachusetts.
Particularly for the types of crimes that we are also incarcerating them for.
So here's the thing. Our justice system is largely based on punishment, and punishment as a deterrent. That often doesn't work for a person who has a drug addiction or a person who suffers from mental illness. And so we've been working with the Pew Charitable Research Foundation and others to look at how we're spending our money, and it's a significant amount of money, on criminal justice. And they started in states that were not blue states, they were red states. They started in Georgia and in Texas. I went to a forum and the two speakers were Newt Gingrich and Grover Norquist. I mean, you can't find more conservative guys than that. So it's not like a liberal conservative issue. It's how we're going to spend money smarter. In addition to criminal justice, there are other things we can do. I'm looking at how cities and towns are spending money and whether we're replicating efforts in 351 cities and towns. The idea is, the taxpayers should be assured that they're getting the best value for their dollars, including with the MBTA, but also with all of our expenditures, and look at outcomes. Are we getting the outcomes that we want? So I would say the biggest challenge before us right now is to balance the budget to produce the outcomes, whether it's investing in early childhood education or public safety or public transportation, but doing so within our means.
You mentioned the fact that in our criminal justice system, some of the types of crimes are affected, or the people that are highly represented within our criminal justice system may have substance abuse, may have mental illness, and I know that's true with my conversations, say for instance with Sheriff Tompkins in Suffolk County. I know that that's the case in terms of percentage of persons with substance abuse and mental health. I know the governor has a task force, and I'm sure that in the legislature that's dealing with this opiate epidemic that's been going across the Commonwealth. Can you talk a little bit about that?
There was a nice fellow who ran for governor who I had not had previous experience with, a guy named Joe Avalone, who was a very good person and a very bright guy. He had been the COO, I think, of Blue Cross. He had helped start a biotech company or high-tech company, just an accomplished fellow. And he said the biggest surprise to him in running for governor and traveling around the state was just what a crisis we have with opiate addictions.
Yes.
Just a crisis. And there are very few families that this hasn't touched. And I hear from a lot of those families. And the idea that a person who is addicted on these drugs and cannot help themselves really, to have them locked away and throw away the key, that's just not the right approach. And it's not going to serve as a deterrent, the idea of going to going to prison when they have that addiction. So there is a task force that's traveling the state. The Attorney General, Maura Healey, the Secretary of Public Health under the governor, a very good person whose name escapes me. She was in the Weld administration.
Oh, yeah. You're talking about, I was thinking about mental health. I was not public health. I was thinking about, yes.
I'll think of it, senior moment. But in any event, so yes, there is a task force that's looking. The opiate addiction is one of the most serious public health crises that's facing our state right now.
Two things that I want to cover, because we have an eclipsed time frame here, because you and I usually go on for about an hour.
All right, so let me just tell the truth here, because Joseph, because of our poor train system, got stuck in traffic. So that's why we're so.
That's right. In terms of and I'm not even going to ask for a refund.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about two things in the short time that we have. One is I want you to give an opportunity to tell the constituents of the towns that you represent what are some of the things we can look for as far as benefiting us on a local level, because I know with your assistant whip position, that's going to take you far and wide and more into across the state. And then lastly, I want to talk about, we always talk about the trioca. We have the governor, Senate President, and the speaker. How do you see that playing out as far as your relationship since new governor, new speaker in terms of Senate President, not new speaker, Senate President Rosenberg? So those two issues, and then we'll probably have to close out.
So let me start with the second. The Senate President Stan Rosenberg is a good friend of mine, and I'm delighted to serve as the Assistant Majority Leader. His approach is dramatically different from the last couple of Senate and House leaders. It's a much more collaborative, much more collegial, much more inclusive form of leadership. And he's spent a couple of years really studying leadership in the most successful organizations, to his credit, and is really trying to implement best practices. So for a lot of us, it's a new way of doing things, but it's so far pretty exciting. In terms of the three, the Senate President, the Speaker, and the Governor, I think sociologists would tell you that in any group dynamics, when there's three people, it's always 2 versus 1, but depending upon the issue, it may shift who the 2 and who the 1 is. Stan Rosenberg, the Senate President, is a very low-key guy that doesn't need a lot of credit, which I think is a very good thing. Tip O'Neill said you can get a lot accomplished if you don't care who gets credit. And so he's been around a while, and I don't know that he necessarily needs the limelight, and I think that's a good thing. As I said, so far Charlie Baker has made the right moves and suggested collaboration, which essentially he needs to do in order to get anything done. And I think, the House members just had a vote of support for the Speaker, Bob DeLeo. So I'm cautiously optimistic. What the communities I represent could expect. In terms of the budget, it's too early. I will continue to give my heart and my industry and be available to them. I know I only hold the seat temporarily, and it's an honor to serve. Some of the issues that I'm working on, I have a bill to ensure true mental health parity. I still think that we are not giving the same level of support from the insurers, from employers for mental health issues as we do for physical health issues. And an example would be if you were to break your leg, you're taken to the hospital, they fix your leg. If you had a psychotic break, we might not have a bed to put that person in, and that loved one. And so I think we need to address that. We certainly need to address the opiate addiction issue. We need to ensure that the taxpayers' money is well spent, which in turn frees up funds to invest in our shared and collected values. Things like early childhood education that we know reaps dividends and that closes the achievement gap. And then finally is transportation. We absolutely have to straighten out this public transportation mess, and I'm confident that we will. I'm confident that we're going to make strides, and that this recent experience has been a heck of a wake-up call for all of us.
Well, since my transportation prevented me from getting here very early, I wasn't able to prod Roy Cohen. I don't believe we have your contact information.
I'm sorry,
up there.
Roy.
Yeah, Roy Cohen. That's the great and grand producer of this program.
He'd be the first to tell you.
That's right. And without him, I would be nothing. But what I'd like for us to do is to tell the viewing audience and your constituents how they can reach you when they have issues and problems. What's the process? I know you have a great staff that I've had the pleasure of working with. So just give them some details so they know how to contact you.
I'm a little hesitant to see what graphics he might put up under my name now after that. So you can reach me at brian.a.joyce@masenate.gov. That's brian.a.joyce@masenate.gov, or by telephone at 617-722-1643. So we have some very good people working with us. It's a lot of fun. It's a great job. Every day is an adventure. And we have some challenges, but that's okay.
Well, Senator, I know there's only a few moments that we have left here, but I just want to be able to say it's been a pleasure working with you on a myriad of issues. You were helpful to Stoughton with our high school efforts. You were helpful to Stoughton with regards to the depot, in which hopefully soon we will bring it to fruition and have some operations going on at the Stoughton Depot. Over the years, you've just been instrumental to this community. And like I said, I'm parochial. I'm not going to worry about Canton and Milton and Easton, Braintree, and Avon, and Quincy, and all the other cities and towns that you represent. But we're pleased to definitely have you.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I'll tell you in Stoughton right now, you have I'm in leadership in the Senate, and both Lou Kafka and Bill Galvin today were named to leadership positions in the House. So you have a senior team, and I think that's helpful.
Well, we're definitely going to take advantage of that. I want to, certainly look forward to having you on again as the year progresses, as we start talking about the budget. What I'm surprised, having been in state government, because usually it's January when
Correct.
the House one is there. So to hear that it's in March is it's going to be interesting to see whether we'll get things resolved in July 1st. But nonetheless, I want to thank you once again for coming on and letting your constituents know what you're doing. We applaud you for your new leadership position as Assistant Whip, and want to thank you for being on the program.
Thank you. Hopefully next time when I come, Roy will have the graphics up.